Imagine a world in which there is high unemployment, vast automation taking over human jobs, and a severe lack of entry-level jobs. This may be the world we see very soon in Florida. As I'm sure you all know, the new minimum wage laws passed, and so the minimum wage will continue to increase until 2026, in which it will be $15 an hour. A study from economist Dr. William Even of Miami University and Dr. David Macpherson of Trinity University concluded that a minimum wage hike would lead to 158,000 fewer jobs in Florida alone. Today, I will be discussing the possible negative outcomes of a raise in the minimum wage. I hope by the end of my speech, you'll be able to see that despite sounding good in principle, a raise in the minimum wage may backfire entirely. So, my three main points I will be discussing today are the arguments for and against raising the minimum wage, why a minimum wage fundamentally opposes a free market, and examples of failures due to raising the minimum wage. First, I would like to address common opinions of people who support raising the minimum wage. The first thing you may hear is that you can't raise a family off of a minimum wage. And yes, that's true. A minimum wage is not meant to raise an entire family off of. It's meant to be entry-level work. It's the responsibility of the employee to make their work more valuable, whether that's learning a new skill, or getting an education, or whichever route they choose to do that. I think that that's why we're all in school, is because we want to make our time and work more valuable so that people are interested in us for jobs and will pay us more money. The second thing you might hear is that businesses have large profit margins and they're raking in a lot of money, so they should share some of that wealth with their employees. While some large businesses may have the profit margins to be able to pay their employees more, most small businesses most likely do not have a whole lot of money that they can be expending on their employees. They have smaller profit margins. As you can see, the professional, scientific, and IT services have almost a 12% profit margin. Healthcare has a 9.6% profit margin, but in these two fields you probably won't be seeing many people on the minimum wage because they're more highly skilled and you need more knowledge in order to go into that field. But for, say, food services and retail, food service is at 4.4% profit margins and retail is at a 2.8% profit margin. So those numbers are very low, and as you can imagine, you can't really afford to pay employees a whole lot more than what they're already paying them. I'm sure that large businesses, on the other hand, would love a minimum wage raise because that means that they can put the other small businesses out of business and have very little competition. Over half of Americans work for a small business, according to the Small Business Association. We cannot risk even a small percentage of businesses failing because that will result in massive unemployment. Another thing you might hear is that raising the minimum wage will help to take people off of welfare. And yes, that may also be true, but it may also put a lot more people on welfare because it will raise unemployment. The reason for unemployment is because the businesses need to make up for increased overhead costs. And there are a few ways to do this. The first would be firing workers or cutting hours. The second would be raising product or service prices, but that will in turn raise the cost of living, which will put us back into the place where we started from the beginning, that a minimum wage is not enough to raise a family. The third is automation. This is a very large threat, and we've already seen examples of this in your local Walmart or Target or Publix. They have the self-checkout lines so that they don't need to employ as many people. And if we raise the minimum wage, that will just incentivize businesses to go ahead and move more towards automation. In order to illustrate why there will be mass unemployment, I want to show you a supply and demand chart. So this is very abstract, and I try to keep it as simple as possible, but essentially this line is the supply of workers, and this line is the demand for workers. So where they meet is called the equilibrium. Now this, in a perfect world, this is where everyone who wants a job has a job, and all the employers who want to bring people on have the employees that they need. But if we put the minimum wage here and say that you can't work for less than whatever this number is, in this case $15 an hour, then the employers will only hire however many people this is. Let's say 40,000 people. But then over here, let's say there's 60,000 people who want a job. So then this gap here is 20,000 people who are unemployed. And so that's just a simpler way for me to break that down. It's a very complicated idea in the first place. But the minimum wage creates what's called an artificial price floor. The minimum wage impedes a free market. Work should be an agreement between the employee and the employer. Government shouldn't be able to tell somebody that they can't work for less than $15 an hour, or whatever their arbitrary number is that they have set. As the great Ron Swanson once said, "The free market is a jungle. It's beautiful and brutal and should be left alone." We see another example of government messing with the free market in New York. When there is no work to be found, workers will find a loophole. We see an example of this in New York's car washes. In January of 2019, New York raised its minimum wage for the car industry to $15 per hour. However, rather than helping, the minimum wage caused many car washes to automate or shut down. Now there's a growing black market where people do illegal car wash work out of the streets in vans, because the minimum wage made it illegal for professional car washes to hire workers at the market rate. So here you see some pictures of the people in New York in their vans, and they're washing cars on the street, and they're going about this illegally because they can't legally work for less than what the government has made them. In addition, businesses that automate benefit from the raise in the minimum wage, because outlawing cheap labor made it difficult for competitors to undercut on prices and services. Even though minimum wage laws have already passed in Florida, I hope I've opened your eyes to some of the negatives that can come from a raise in the minimum wage. I would like to ask that if you do support the minimum wage, you reconsider your opinion, and maybe even help to spread awareness of the downfalls of a raise in the minimum wage. I understand that these laws come from a place of good intentions, but unfortunately, good intentions do not always make for good policy. Thank you.